A saloon girl falls to her knees at dawn, clutching a rancher's
Please, you
leg
have
with
to
tears in
help
her
him.
eyes.
He's all
I'll
I
warm your
have.
bed
They'll
if you
hang
save
him
my
if you
brother.
don't.
The night in Dry Creek carried the kind of silence that weighed heavy on the bones. The lamps outside the Silver Spur Saloon flickered against the wind, casting long shadows across the alley where the dirt turned to mud. Somewhere inside, a piano, played off-key, laughter cracked like glass, and boots stomped to the rhythm of card games and whiskey. But out here, away from the noise, the air was raw, sharp with dust, smoke, and the faint iron tang of blood. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe to the channel and tap the bell icon. Stories like this deserve to be remembered. Thomas Hale leaned against the hitching post, one hand on the worn leather strap of his saddlebag, the other resting heavy on the Colt at his hip. He was a man who carried silence like a second skin. His broad shoulders stooped not with age but with memory. The war had carved its mark into him, not just on the scar that ran across his ribs, but in the faraway way his eyes drifted toward, every sound in the dark, measuring danger. That's when he heard the scrape of boots on gravel. She came out of the shadow like a ghost draped in crimson silk. Clara May. The saloon girl men paid for songs and nights they couldn't remember. Her hair was pinned but coming loose, a tangle of black curls framing a face too young for the weariness it carried. She stopped in front of him, clutching her, shawl tight around her shoulders, her chest rising and falling as though she'd been running. "Mr. Hale," she said, her voice catching, "I need you." He straightened, the words unsettling him more than a cocked pistol. Clara May wasn't known for pleading. She was known for laughing at men's foolishness, for slipping coins from their pockets as easy as slipping a kiss. Tonight, though, there was no act in her eyes, just fear, raw, unpolished, and heavy. "My brother," she whispered. "Luke. They took him." The name brought a faint memory, a boy who used to shine boots outside the general store, always hanging on Clara's shadow. But Thomas didn't speak. He just waited, the way scouts did, letting her fill the silence. She swallowed hard, her hands trembling. Rafe McCullough's gang. Luke crossed them in a game, thought he was clever. They dragged him off before I could stop it, said he'd pay in blood. The name Rafe burned through Thomas's gut like bad whiskey. Outlaw, former cavalry. A man who turned war into a habit long after surrender. Clara's next words were not spoken so much as gasped. I can't lose him. He's all I've got left." She hesitated, then her gaze locked on his, desperate, steady, almost defiant. "If you help me bring him back, I'll warm your bed. Every night. Yours, Thomas. Yours alone." The air thickened. The piano inside faltered. Somewhere down the street a coyote howled. Thomas didn't answer at first. He studied her, the tremor in her lips, the iron in her eyes. It wasn't lust she offered, not really. It was the only currency a woman like her was allowed to hold in this town, and the shame in her voice cut deeper than the words. "I don't take payment that way," he said at last, his tone flat but carrying weight. Her shoulders stiffened. For a second she looked like she might slap him or collapse, or both. Then she whispered, "Then don't do it for me. Do it for him." Thomas felt his jaw tighten. War had left him with ghosts. Boys he couldn't save, brothers buried in shallow graves, the stench of powder still clinging to his lungs. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw another life slipping because he wasn't fast enough, strong enough, willing enough. He should have walked away. He wanted to walk away. Instead, he reached for the reins of his horse, his voice low. "Where?" Clara blinked, breath trembling as though she hadn't believed he'd agree. "Out past the dry riverbed. Old silver mine. That's where Rafe holes up." Thomas swung the saddle onto his Mustang with practiced ease, the leather creaking in the dark. His movements were calm, but his chest ached with the weight of the choice. Clara stepped closer, her hand brushing his sleeve, her voice breaking. "Thank you. You don't know what this means." He didn't meet her eyes. "Don't thank me yet." The two of them stood in the alley, lantern light painting their shadows long against the wall. a scarred soldier and a saloon girl, bound. By desperation, about to walk into fire. The night wind shifted, carrying the smell of rain and gunpowder. Somewhere in the dark, trouble waited, and Thomas Hale knew he was riding toward it. The desert greeted them with silence, the kind that pressed into the skin like heat from a forge. Sand stretched wide under a bruised moon, and the mesquite trees stood like twisted skeletons along the dry wash. Each hoofbeat of Thomas's Mustang echoed through the emptiness, steady and certain. Behind him, Clara May's smaller bay mare followed, her rider sitting too rigid in the saddle, trying to hide that she'd never ridden so far, so fast, with so much at stake. The night, air tasted of dust and iron. Somewhere far off, coyotes yipped, then fell silent as if even they sensed something grim moving through the land. Thomas rode without speaking, his rifle tied across his saddle, his eyes scanning ridges and shadows. The habit of survival never left him. Not after the war, not after the raids. He had seen too many dawns rise over corpses. He would not let that happen again, not if he could help it. Behind him, Clara broke the silence. You ride like a man who knows the ground will open up beneath him any second. He didn't look back. That's the only way to ride out here. She huffed, gripping the reins tighter. You think I don't know danger? You think I've never... Her voice cracked. She stopped herself, drew in a breath, and forced her tone steady again. I've lived through worse than this trail. Thomas almost smiled, but the weight in her words kept him sober. He'd seen her in the saloon, seen how she laughed in men's faces and dealt cards with the sharpness of a knife. But now, under the open sky, her bravado rang thin. Danger in town ain't the same as danger out here, he said. Out here, no walls to hide behind. Just your aim and your grit. Clara's chin lifted, a flash of fire in her dark eyes. Then you'll see I've got both. For a time, the only sound was the wind sighing through brittle brush. But as they descended toward the dried riverbed, Thomas stiffened in the saddle. Hoofprints. Fresh. Dozens of them. He dismounted, crouching low to the sand, running a scarred hand over the indentations. Not just Rafe's men, he murmured. Comanche. Clara shifted nervously in her saddle. I thought they kept to the high mesas now. They do, Thomas said grimly, unless they've got reason not to. The tension thickened. Every whisper of wind felt like a warning. Clara's hand drifted to the small derringer tucked at her thigh, her knuckles white, and then, from the ridge above, came the sound of hooves. Shadows slid across the moonlight. 6 riders, silent. Their ponies nimble, their spears glinting. The Comanche had found them. Thomas raised his hand slowly, not reaching for the rifle. He spoke low to Clara. Don't move sudden. Don't speak unless I tell you. The riders circled down, faces painted with war markings that caught the moonlight like fire. Their leader, tall and stern, studied Thomas with a gaze sharp as flint. Clara's pulse thundered. She wanted to scream, to plead, to fight, but she forced herself still, remembering his words. Finally, the leader spoke in halting English. White man ride where blood is owed. Thomas met his eyes. I ride to take back a boy from thieves. Nothing more. The leader's gaze flicked to Clara, her silken shawl now ragged in the wind, her face pale but unflinching. She yours? Thomas hesitated, just long enough for Clara to glance at him. Then he said evenly, She rides, under my protection. The Comanche studied them both, then gave a single nod. Without another word, he and his riders wheeled their ponies and disappeared back into the ridge as silent as they had come. Clara exhaled sharply, trembling. They could have killed us. They still might, Thomas said, mounting again. But they've got bigger prey in mind. Rafe's men won't last long if they cross the Comanche. They pressed on until the moon slid low. At dawn, the desert burned red, and that's when they found them. The first outlaw camp sat along the dry riverbed. 3 men, careless, drunk from the night before. Horses tied loose, bottles scattered, rifles leaning against stones. Thomas dismounted, checking the chamber of his Winchester. He glanced at Clara. Stay behind me. Her jaw tightened. I won't cower. Cowering keeps you breathing, he said coldly. But if you've got the nerve, then when I fire, you make your shots count. The moment cracked open like thunder. Thomas fired first, his bullet punching through a whiskey bottle and into a man's chest in the same breath. Clara's hand shook, but she drew the derringer, firing point blank at another outlaw who stumbled too close. The shot tore into his shoulder, spinning him to the dirt with a scream. The last man lunged, knife drawn, slashing toward Thomas. Steel flashed. Thomas slammed him back with the rifle stock, drove a knee into his gut, and finished it clean with a single shot. Then there was only silence again, heavy, hot, and filled with the smell of gunpowder. Clara lowered the derringer, her hands trembling so hard the weapon nearly fell. I shot him, Thomas walked over, gently pried the gun from her grip. You kept your brother alive another hour, don't forget that. Her eyes searched his face, not for praise, but for something steadier, something she could cling to. But Thomas gave her nothing more. He just wiped his rifle clean, glanced at the rising sun, and said, Come on. This was only the edge of it. Luke's deeper in. Together they rode on, leaving the dead where they fell, the riverbed behind them red as blood. Ahead stretched outlaw country, and the horizon burned brighter with every mile. The fire burned low, no higher than a man's knee, its smoke curling upward and disappearing into a black sky freckled with stars. The desert was silent, but for the crackle of wood and the restless snort of their horses tied nearby. Clara May sat with her knees pulled close, a shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. The flames painted her face in flickers, strong, beautiful, but carrying a weariness that no rouge or song in the saloon could hide. Across from her, Thomas Hale sharpened his knife with steady, methodical strokes, the sound scraping against the silence. His profile was hard in the firelight, his jaw clenched, his eyes distant, as if he were here in body but somewhere else in his mind. For a long while neither spoke. It was Clara who broke the silence first. You don't sleep much, do you? She asked softly. Thomas didn't look up. Sleep's when the dead come back. I keep 'em away by staying awake. The words lingered in the night air. Clara studied him, this quiet, scarred man who had stepped into her misery when he could have turned away. There was more to him than the rifle on his back. She pulled the shawl tighter. When I was 16, my pa lost our farm. Drought hit, then sickness, then the debt came due. He gave me to the saloon to settle what he owed. Said it was either that or watch us starve. Thomas stopped sharpening. His eyes finally lifted, steady and unreadable, but listening. Clara let out a breath that shook in her chest. I hated him for it. I hated the men more. First time I bled for days, thought I was dying. But after a while I stopped feeling. Laughed when they wanted me to laugh, cried when no one was looking. That's how you survive. The fire popped. Her words seemed to echo in the canyon beyond. Thomas set the knife down, his face unreadable but taut with something. Pity, rage, maybe guilt. Nobody should have to carry that. She gave a brittle laugh, her eyes shining. You learn to carry it or it carries you. But Luke... Her voice cracked and she pressed her lips tight. He's still a boy. He's not ready for the... Wait. I can't let it bury him the way it buried me. Thomas leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice low. You've done what you had to. That ain't weakness, Clara. That's strength. For the first time, she believed he meant. Its silence stretched again, softer this time. Clara studied him in the firelight, the scar along his ribs visible where his shirt hung open, the shadows carved deep under his eyes. You carry ghosts, she said gently. Who were they? He looked into the flames, jaw tight. Men I scouted with, boys I trained, families I promised to bring their sons back. I didn't. Some nights I see 'em still, in the smoke, in the dark. They look at me like I left 'em to die. His voice dropped to a whisper. And maybe I did. Clara's throat tightened. She reached across the fire, her fingers brushing his hand, calloused meeting calloused. You can't carry every death, nobody can. Thomas stared at her touch, then at her face. And for the first time, she saw the man beneath the soldier. Wounded, alone, needing the same thing she did. The fire burned lower, the desert wind grew colder, and Clara, heart pounding, shifted closer. She let her shawl fall back from her shoulders, her eyes fixed on his. "You said you wouldn't take payment," she whispered. "But I wasn't lying. I don't know how else to show what you mean to me. Let me—" Her hands trembled as she reached for him, offering herself in the only way the world had taught her she had value. Thomas caught her wrists gently, firmly, stopping her. His voice was rough, strained. "Clara, no, not like this." Tears welled in her eyes, anger and shame twisting her face. "Why not? Am I not good enough for you? Is that it?" He pulled her closer, not in desire, but in something deeper. His arms wrapped around her, drawing her against his chest. "Because you're more than what they paid you to be, and I won't be another man who takes." She stiffened at first, then slowly, let herself sink against him. For the first time in years, she felt the safety of being held without expectation. No bargain, no transaction, just warmth. They stayed that way under the stars, the fire dwindling to embers. Clara listened to the steady beat of his heart beneath the scars. Thomas closed his eyes not to sleep, but to breathe in the scent of her hair and the reality that for once he wasn't alone. The night stretched long and quiet, the desert cradling them both in its silence. And when dawn broke, painting the horizon gold, Clara still lay in his arms. For the first time since she could remember, she had not woken afraid. The wind moaned through the canyon like a dying prayer, carrying with it the echo of shovels on stone. An old silver mine, hollowed by greed, now housed something darker than ore. It housed betrayal. The mine's entrance yawned open in the cliffside, framed by timbers blackened with age. Lanterns burned low within, shadows stretching across jagged stone like the ribs of some long-dead beast. Clara's breath caught as she followed Thomas up the narrow path. She had dreamed of this moment, of finding Luke, of bringing him home. But the smell of whiskey, sweat, and blood wafting out of the shaft told her this rescue would not be a simple deliverance. Inside, rough voices muttered, boots scraping against gravel. A shot of laughter broke the air, followed by the clang of a tin cup against rock. Then she saw him. Luke sat bound against a support beam, his face bruised but alive. Relief flooded Clara, until his eyes met hers, and in them she saw shame. "Clara," his voice cracked, soft as a whisper. Before she could rush forward, a figure stepped between them. Rafe McCullough, broad-shouldered, with a beard streaked in gray and eyes cold as winter steel. His revolver rested easy in his hand like it had never left his palm. "Well, I'll be damned," Rafe drawled. "Thomas Hale, the Army's sharpest scout, riding into my den like he forgot who carved him a place at the fire." Thomas's jaw tightened. He didn't lift his rifle, though his fingers twitched near the stock. "We came for the boy," Thomas said evenly. Rafe's grin widened. "The boy? You mean our boy? Luke rode with us before he ran off crying to Big Sister, ain't that right?" Clara froze. The words cut deeper than a blade. She turned to Luke, her voice trembling. "Tell him he's lying." Luke dropped his head, unable to meet her eyes. "Clara, I thought I could get out. Thought I could walk away. But men like Rafe don't let you walk." Her chest burned, betrayal flooding through her veins. Rafe stepped closer to Thomas, his shadow stretching across the dirt. "You've been wandering too long, old friend. Alone. Broken. Fighting battles that ain't yours. What's a man like? You doing chasing scraps in a town that'll never love you? Ride with us. You know the pay's good. You know the women don't say no." The words dripped with poison, echoing in Thomas's chest. He remembered nights by campfires with men who laughed like brothers. He remembered the war, how the army left him, discarded once they'd wrung him dry. He had killed for flags, for captains, for orders that left mothers childless. What made riding with outlaws any different? Rafe's hand rested on Thomas's shoulder, heavy as iron. Think on it. You and me again. No law, no guilt. Just the open road and silver enough to drown the past. Clara's witness Clara watched, her nails digging into her palms. She saw the flicker in Thomas's eyes, the hesitation, the quiet pull toward damnation. Don't, she whispered, though her voice was drowned by the crackle of the fire. She stepped forward shaking, her face wet with angry tears. You think the world owes you something, Thomas? Fine, but I'll tell you what it doesn't owe. It doesn't owe men like Rafe another bullet, another grave. I've buried too many because of men like him, because of men like you. Her words lashed him harder than any whip. He turned to her, torn, his chest heaving. The mine grew still. The outlaws leaned against the walls, hands hovering near pistols, waiting for Thomas's answer. Thomas stared into the fire. The smell of smoke and damp rock filled his lungs, the heat biting his scarred skin. Finally, his voice broke the silence. You're right, Rafe. I've taken too much from this land already. For a heartbeat, Clara thought he had given in, her breath caught in horror. Then Thomas drew his rifle. But I won't take her brother's soul for your pocket. The crack of gunfire split the mine. Chaos erupted. Sparks flew from lanterns as bullets tore through the darkness. Clara dropped low, shielding her face from flying rock. Thomas moved like a man possessed. Calm, precise, deadly. His rifle spoke. In thunderclaps, each shot cutting down a ghost from his past. Rafe bellowed orders, dragging Luke to his feet, pressing a revolver to the boy's head. Drop it, Hale! He roared. Thomas froze, sweat dripping down his brow. His finger hovered. Near the trigger, Clara's voice cut through the storm. Thomas, and if you give up now, we all die. Her eyes locked on him, fierce and unyielding. And Thomas remembered the night before, her trembling confession, her broken strength, the way she leaned into him at dawn. He steadied his breath. Rafe sneered, pressing the barrel harder into Luke's temple. You ain't man enough to choose, Thomas. You never were. Thomas's voice dropped, low and final. You're right. I ain't choosing between you and me. I'm choosing them. His rifle cracked, shattering the lantern above Rafe's head. Flames burst across the beam, sparks raining down. Luke twisted free, stumbling into Clara's arms. Rafe cursed, firing, wild as the mine filled with smoke and fire. Thomas tackled him into the dirt, the two men grappling like beasts in the dark. When the smoke cleared, Rafe lay still on the ground, blood darkening the dust. Thomas stood over him, chest heaving, eyes hollow, the outlaws who remained scattered into the desert, their shouts fading into the night. Clara clutched Luke, trembling. Relief mixed with fury, grief with love. She turned to Thomas, searching his face. His rifle hung limp at his side, his gaze fixed on the fire climbing the beams. For a moment, she saw it, the temptation still smoldering in him, the part of him that had almost chosen damnation. But then he looked at her, and though his eyes were weary, they were clear. They stumbled out of the mine as dawn broke over the canyon, fire and smoke billowing behind them. The rising sun painted the horizon red, not just with blood but with promise. The three of them stood together, scarred but unbroken, watching the light spread across the desert. And in that fragile silence, Clara realized, salvation was not won in a single battle. It was a choice, one Thomas had to keep making day by day. The first blast came like thunder cracking open the earth. A wall of flame erupted from the silver mine, throwing sparks against the canyon walls, painting the night in violent orange. Horses screamed, men shouted, and the echoes rolled like drums of war. Thomas felt the heat scorch his face as the timbers collapsed inside the mine. His choice was made. Rafe McCullough's bargain lay in ashes. The outlaws roared in fury, rifles flashing through the haze, but Thomas's hand was steady. Every shot he fired was a rejection of the life Rafe tempted him with. Beside him, Clara gripped her brother's revolver with trembling hands. Her hair clung to her face, damp with sweat and soot, but her eyes were hard. She wasn't the frightened saloon girl anymore. She was a sister, a fighter, a survivor. Stay low, Thomas barked, pressing her shoulder down as bullets chipped stone overhead. But Clara rose anyway, teeth clenched, firing into the shadows where the outlaws rushed. Her first shot cracked wide, but the second struck true, dropping a man into the dust. She didn't flinch, didn't look away, only chambered another round. The canyon became a battlefield. Gunfire sparked like lightning in the dark, and the smell of sulfur and burning wood choked the air. Outlaws scattered across the ridges, their shouts echoing between stone walls. Thomas moved with brutal precision, his rifle kicking against his shoulder, his frame outlined by firelight. But with each shot, pain streaked down his side. The graze from a bullet he'd taken earlier was worsening, blood soaking into his shirt. He ignored it, forcing himself forward. "Luke!" Clara's voice cracked as she caught sight of her brother bound near a cart, guarded by two outlaws. She sprinted before Thomas could stop her, sliding behind cover, heart hammering. The memory of saloon chains, of men who thought her body their property, fueled her rage. This time, no one would take her brother. She lunged out, firing wild. A bullet grazed her arm, spinning her against the rock, but she grit her teeth and kept shooting. The rider's return. Then came the sound that froze every gun hand, the thunder of hooves. From the northern ridge, Comanche riders stormed into the canyon, their silhouettes cutting against the firelit sky. War cries split the chaos, arrows whistling, striking down outlaws who had no time to turn. The outlaws broke, some trying to flee, others digging in to fight both enemies. Clara staggered back against the rocks, blood trickling down her arm, her pistol almost empty. She looked at Thomas, his face pale, lips tight against pain, but his eyes locked on hers. No words passed between them, only the silent vow. Neither would let the other fall. Through the firestorm, a tall Comanche chief rode forward, his horse rearing at the edge of the battlefield. His voice cut through the smoke, commanding silence. Thomas stepped into the open, rifle lowered but ready, his stance firm. The outlaws cursed, shouting for blood, but the Comanche riders held their lines, waiting. "Rafe's men," Thomas called, his voice ragged but strong, "are thieves, killers. They take from the land, from your people, from mine. If this canyon burns tonight, let it burn their greed, not our lives." The chief's eyes narrowed, scanning the battlefield, the corpses, the flames, the terrified outlaws. Slowly he lifted his hand, signaling his riders to hold. But Rafe McCullough would not. Snarling, he drew his revolver and fired. The bullet ripped into Thomas's side, dropping him to one knee. Clara screamed his name, rushing to him, but Thomas shoved her back, raising his rifle with shaking hands. His vision blurred, but he found Rafe's shadow in the firelight. The rifle cracked. Rafe staggered, clutching his chest before crumpling into the dust. Chaos erupted, but this time, the Comanche surged, arrows cutting down the last of the outlaws. In minutes, the canyon was theirs. Only firelight smoke and silence remained. Clara dropped beside Thomas, pressing her hands against his wound. Blood slicked her fingers, warm and terrifying. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't you dare leave me now." Thomas's breathing was shallow, his face pale as ash. Yet even through pain, his hand found hers, gripping with what strength he had left. Luke stumbled free from the ropes, rushing to his sister, his face streaked with dirt and shame. But Clara didn't look at him. Her entire world was the man, bleeding in her arms. The fire in the mine roared higher, flames licking at the sky, casting the canyon in red and gold. Clara held Thomas against her chest, rocking slightly, as if her heartbeat alone could keep him tethered. The Comanche watched, in silence, their chief lowering his head with solemn respect before turning away. This was not their fight anymore. It belonged to the woman who had stood against the fire, and the man who chose honor over damnation. As the first pale streaks of dawn touched the canyon walls, Clara lifted her gaze skyward, eyes burning with tears. She was no longer the girl sold and broken. She was a woman remade in fire, and she would not let him die in vain. The first light of dawn cut through the smoke of a dying fire. Ash drifted in the wind like gray snowflakes, settling on the broken earth where lives had been lost only hours before. Horses shifted nervously, their hides slick with sweat as if they too could feel the weight of the dead left behind. Luke stumbled forward first, his body hunched, his boots dragging through the dirt. His face, usually hard with defiance, looked hollow now. The outlaw in him had burned away in the nights, violence leaving only a man scarred, guilty, but breathing. Clara followed close, her steps slow, her hand pressed to her side where blood had dried beneath torn cloth. And then Thomas emerged, last of the three, leaning on the saddle of his horse, his left arm bound tight with cloth. His jaw was set, but his eyes betrayed the weight he carried. They were alive, but barely. The sun rose slow, stretching gold across the horizon, spilling light on the town that waited miles away. Each step toward it felt like walking through water, heavy, uncertain, fragile. Luke's voice cracked the silence. "I can't keep on like this," he muttered, eyes fixed on the dirt. "Stealing, running, burying the men I ride with. I'm done, I swear it. No more outlaw path." Thomas said nothing. He adjusted his grip on the saddle, his boots crunching against gravel. He'd heard oaths like that before, desperate, promises made under the weight of guilt. But he didn't judge Luke. He only knew that a man's word was proven in what followed, not in what was spoken. Clara glanced between them. She had seen both men bleed, had seen them stand when most would have fallen. Yet she also knew scars ran deeper than the skin. Luke's war was with himself. Thomas's war was silence, that endless belief that he wasn't worthy of anything good. They reached the ridge just as the sun broke fully across the sky. The desert stretched wide and merciless, and the town below looked smaller than ever. Just wood, smoke, and shadows. Thomas stopped at the ridge. He pulled his reins and turned his horse aside. His eyes didn't rest on the town. They drifted out toward the endless horizon where a man could disappear and no one would follow. "I'll ride from here," he said quietly, his voice dry as dust. "A saloon girl's got no reason to tie herself to a man like me. You've done enough. I'll trouble you no longer." Clara froze. Her throat tightened. The words cut her deeper than any blade. She stepped toward him, weak but unshaken, her voice low, trembling with both anger and something softer. "You fool," she whispered. "You think I offered myself back then just to warm your bed? You think that's all I had to give?" Thomas turned, his face hard but his eyes betraying the truth. He believed it. He believed he was unworthy of more. Clara's hands shook as she reached for him, gripping his arm, forcing him to look at her. "I saw you fight for me, I saw you bleed for me, and I saw the way you carried me when I could not walk. Don't you tell me you're nothing, Thomas. Don't you dare." For a long moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the wind. Then, Thomas lowered his gaze, unable to hold hers. His silence wasn't rejection. It was the cracking of a wall that had stood too long. Luke, leaning against his horse, let out a bitter laugh that turned almost gentle. "Hell," he muttered. "After all we've been through, if two broken souls can't find something worth living for, then what was all the blood for?" Clara looked back at Thomas, her eyes softer now. "It's not just about survival anymore. It's about what comes after. You ride away now, and we both go back to ghosts. You stay. And maybe we find something worth the scars." Her words settled heavy in the air. Thomas finally exhaled. Slow, tired, but for the first time, less alone. He gave the faintest nod, and though he said nothing, it was enough. The three of them mounted their horses. The town lay waiting, but the truth was no one knew what awaited them there, forgiveness, judgment, or exile. Yet for the first time, they didn't ride as strangers bound by circumstance. They rode as something else. Scarred, yes, but bound by survival, by choices, by love forged in fire. The horizon blazed with light, stretching endless across the west. Wind swept through the ashes of the battlefield behind them, carrying smoke into the sky, carrying silence into memory. And as the sun rose higher, painting the desert gold, the three figures rode forward, not toward certainty, but toward the fragile promise of a new beginning. That was my story. If it reached you, tell me what you felt. Don't let silence bury us again. Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell me where in the world you're listening from.